Thank you all so much. It's really an honor to be here with you all, to just share a little bit about my story and how I got here and what brought me to this work. I have to reflect a lot, like where do our values come from and how do we develop them? And I think for me, my commitment to this work really started from a young age of having one foot on each side of a widening privilege and class gap in our society. I was raised by a single immigrant mom. She came to this country with a few $100s in her pocket. And I just remember so distinctly, like, just commuting from home to school felt like going to another country. We didn't just only speak different languages, but I just remember so starkly going from, my mom who worked as a full-time flight attendant. To this day, I don't understand how she did it. So for all the single moms out there and single parents, like, just so much love. And then, coming to this affluent suburban school where I went to school, and I just remember my classmates having support system, paid tutors, au pairs, parents proofreading their homework. And, I waited long hours alone at home for my mom to come home. And so it was really through this experience that I started to, get a sense of, like, there's this injustice in our society. You don't have the language for it. And I also remember all the kind of racism my mom and I faced, really were some of the earliest memories for me. And so, I think that's that sense of voicelessness and this desire to have a voice in our society really started from a young age. And I remember distinctly, as Leverett shared, I didn't have a very traditional path to politics, but I remember when I was a child and my mom brought me to downtown Boston. And she pointed up at the skyscrapers and she said, someday I want you to work in one of these big, shiny buildings. I want you to be able to do something I can do. And truthfully, I did exactly that. I wanted to make my mom proud. I wanted to, do the kind of accomplish all the things. She gave up so much for me to go to college, so much for me to really pursue whatever dream I wanted. So I was working as an antitrust economist. And I had this moment with the 2016 campaign of, there is more than just sort of fighting and sort of getting the best, paying job and getting out there and sort of proving yourself. There's like this collective problem we need to solve. We need to, address healthcare, right? The fact that people are dying, the racial inequity of healthcare. I mean, all these things were really sticking to me that sort of brought with me when I was a child, was really coming to the forefront in 2016. So I took some time off from my antitrust work to work on the Bernie Sanders campaign and later for the 2016 general campaign for the Democratic primary. And as we know how all that turned out, but I had this moment, I remember, in New Hampshire where I had this, it dawned on me of, like, this is actually all of these collective problems that we face as a society. I'm not just like on the sidelines of that. We actually have the power to make history. And I really deeply believe that with each and every one of you in this room, we have the power to shape the society that we want to see. And so I really had this shift from being like, I just need to get out there and survive. I want to survive and, earn money and get out there, to saying, wait, no, these big problems, we are all interconnected. These are not just singular atomized problems. We need to solve all of the biggest challenges in our society, whether it's the climate crisis, the housing crisis, and public education, funding the T, funding our transportation and infrastructure. I mean, these are collective problems that we are all responsible for solving. And that was this kind of turning point for me. And I really could never turn back from that, to be honest. I kind of tried to go back to antitrust and back to sort of, the spreadsheets, which I still love. I love a good, graph and presentation, but, that wasn't, that I knew that that's just like not where, with everything going on in our society, we have to make that change. So first, I'm just so grateful to be with you all, because that is what I think brought each and every one of us here, right, is to solve these collective problems together. So that brought me, to kind of looking towards after the, the national campaign, like what's going on in my hometown where I grew up in Massachusetts. And, I remember distinctly in 17 and 18, the, lack of, we hadn't passed any immigrant rights law for decades in our state. We were underfunding our schools. And I was like, what the heck is going on? We need to change this, right? And it came back to voice for me, because I've seen over and over again through my work how the status quo of these institutions want to make women, people of color, poor folks, marginalized folks, LGBTQI folks, everyone to feel like they don't belong and that their voice doesn't belong there. And the reality is your voice belongs there in the State House. It belongs in City Hall. It belongs in all these institutions. And that's what really drove me to found Act en Masse, to say all of our voices, in fact, all of us, right, coming together and solving these problems, we actually make better legislation that way. We solve problems better when we come together rather than keeping people out. And so that's sort of what's been that's my mission when I founded Act en Masse, continues to be my mission today as a state rep, because as Leverett explained, earlier, I remember you said that experience, I was just thinking that when you walk into the State House, right, first you go through metal detectors and the building is designed to make you feel lost. I got lost today, actually. I'm no joke. I still get lost in that building. It is like an actual, design of the building to sort of to take to disempower you. And I think that's the thing that I'm so excited to speak with you all and so excited of Commonwealth Seminar's work, is to really equip you all, that you all are not only deserving to be in the State House, we need you in the State House. Without you, we are not going to be able to solve these problems. And I genuinely mean that from the bottom of my heart. So I'm just so grateful that you all are here. We're doing this work together. It really takes, right, the connections between all of us. And I always say, all of the problems that we're facing, these are generational struggles, right? We see it across from our elders to our youth, right? And we fight for this change, not just for our own selves and our own lives, which absolutely we deserve. Every one of us deserves dignity and respect, but it's also the desire to say, I've seen what my mom went through, my grandparents went through, and I see the same replica of the same institutions and the same oppression happening to our youth, right? That's something that is the work and the commitment that we want to change these systems and to change these status quo, so we can build a healthy, vibrant democracy and healthy society where we're all thriving. So that's really how I came to be and where I do my work. I'm currently serving as the state representative for the 27th Middlesex District in Somerville. It's truly just an absolute joy to do this work. I've worked on stopping corporate tax breaks, ensuring we fully fund our schools. Right now, actually, I'm working this is real. This is happening in this moment. I'm working on trying to stop police from coming back into our public school system so that we can replace that response with, true public safety, right? True mental health, social workers, right? Carers, right? And not someone, with a badge and a gun. And so that's something that, even this week, I feel so energized because I've been talking to parents, people of color in my district, and we're organizing this minute, right? This is happening. But that's just the thing I'm working on this week. But it's just so thrilling and exciting to be with you all, to work on these problems. I know a lot of exciting stuff is going to happen in the next 2 years as well. So I just want to say, please don't be a stranger. Reach out however I can help with equipping you all to pursue your passions and to make this foundational change for all of our collective needs and for our common good. I'm so here for it and excited to be here. So thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Erika. And thank you for bringing the energy. I think that's one thing that you never fail to bring, is the energy, and then it's really it's empowering, and it's great to see. So do folks have any questions or comments or suggestions or allyships you want to build with her? Just feel free, fire away. I clearly we're not shy. So I think I see Jessica with her hand up. Jessica, is that your hand? All right. Or is that, I can never tell if nowadays if it's a wave or if it's a hand. So I think it's a hand. So,
Hi, Erika. Thank you so much for talking to us. I really connected with your story about your mom and your background. I'm just wondering if you could share with us a little bit about how you actually got into your current position, or what that transition was into politics. Anytime I talk to people about wanting to get into politics, they're like, why would you want to do that? Or what change are you going to make? So it's humbling to be with somebody who's in a position of in your field. And I just would love to hear a little bit more of all of 1 minute about your your career.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, I think, these systems are structural, right? There's reasons why people who look like me, people look like you, like are not, it's like we need to like also see ourselves in these halls of power, right? And that's something that even growing up, I remember, I mean, our first AAPI representative was elected 10 years ago. I mean, 12 years ago. It's not, and same with, people of color in the state house. So no, I think that, it's so important that, we also provide those models and roadmaps, right, for generations to come. I'll say just a little bit of how I came. I mean, for me, it's always been about the grassroots, right, and about organizing from the ground up. I think that's really that experience of, being a trainer and facilitator with the MTA. I worked on the Student Opportunity Act, which got $1.5 billion to public schools. And I will say too, I'm very proud of that achievement, and we need more. We need to be putting funding to public higher ed. We need to be putting more funding to our schools. I think the COVID pandemic has just shown, full on, right, the needs of our communities. So I'm very, passionate about that. But yeah, I think that work of building, I mean, these things didn't just happen alone, right? And I think that's what is so beautiful about politics. And I will say, like, full disclosure, it is a contact sport. There are days where it is intense. I'm not going to like sugarcoat that. But I do love the piece of coalition building around issues and bringing people together. I mean, that is how Act en Masse was founded, was through building coalitions across the state, bringing stakeholders together, bringing organized labor, progressive advocacy groups. I mean, I think that's the piece too that's so key, is that oftentimes when the status quo prevails is because they've managed to keep us fighting against each other rather than together, right? And so, and that was actually something, a lot of my bills I'm so excited about. Just as a quick example, a lot of times it's been the struggle between the rural, suburban, and urban parts of our state, right? Like, it's a zero-sum game, and like, how can we bring all of our interests together to push for the things that we all need? And that's something that a number of my bills are around that as well. But yeah, I think that coalition building, and also I worked with a lot of reps in the building to sort of, work together to put pressure on the systems of power to get, stop corporate tax breaks. Like, so that, it's kind of like getting creative and figuring out like who's with us and who can we bring along, what power, sources do we have, and what can we use that to challenge, right, what is currently in place. That's a lot. I know it's like a lot of things at once, but I hope that answered your question. Of that really was the roadmap for how I got involved locally with community organizing. I think that's also was really the groundwork for preparing me to run for office. And I'm happy to answer questions around that. I don't know if that's like a focus people are interested in, but that is its own thing as well. But I think that is like a, that experience of advocacy and bringing coalitions together, being strategic, because, we have to be, right? That's the thing. It's like, we have to be, we have to be, because we don't have all the resources, which is by design, we have to be resourceful. And that's what I learned from my mom. That's what I learned from my communities, right? And that's where we get really strategic about, where can we find those resources and sort of challenge these systems in place. So I hope I answered your question. I know it was like a lot at once, but yeah. Please say if I didn't, I'm happy to elaborate.
Great. Anybody else with questions? There are a couple in the chat that were, David asked if you could pronounce your last name.
Oh, yes.
And then
Yeah, it's Uyterhoeven. I always say it's like Idaho potatoes, Uyterhoeven. So yeah.
Oh, so I have been pronouncing it correctly all these years. It's just my lack of confidence. Okay. All right, that's better. And Diego did share somebody asked for your contact info. Diego did share the profile on your on the legislative webpage. So Diego took care of that. So thanks, Diego. Clive has his hand up.
Yes. Thank you so much, Rep. Uyterhoeven, for joining us. I know that you are kind of an advocate for, improved transportation and transit. And if I remember correctly, your district includes the new extension on the Green Line? Yes. So what was your kind of reaction to that? And what are some benefits that you can see for improving, transit infrastructure in the Boston area?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we need to, right, like the biggest carbon emission is from transportation in the greater Boston area. So for this need to expand public transportation and transportation just as a human right, right? Like that idea, we are fighting to keep that at the forefront. We want mobility is a human right, right? We need to protect that as a right. And I think in a lot of ways, right, Somerville as a environmental justice community, gentrification, we have the highest increase in housing prices than any other municipality in the state over the past 10 years. It was a city that was neglected, right, from having transit connections. And, now that has changed, but then what we see is transit oriented displacement. And that's the piece that we're really at the forefront of fighting. So on one hand, I'm so thrilled, right? Like we made this big public investment. It was a tough fight. I cannot take credit for it because it started before I was born. But it was really, right, like it's something that we're very grateful for. And I want to see that, right, across the Commonwealth, right, particularly for marginalized communities that do get left behind. I mean, there's so much, research around how people of color, right, immigrant communities spend, hours and hours of time more on public transportation and have, difficulty accessing their workplaces, right? And that's a real injustice that we need to tackle head on. And we want to make sure that those investments, like the Green Line, are going, to all of our, our communities. And on the other hand, we have to make sure that we're not letting those investments turn into transit-oriented displacement, because we are seeing, I can't tell you, there's not a month that goes by where I hear from constituents, and not just a few constituents, like an entire, buildings of constituents that are being told your rent is going up $400, $600, $800, because we can have people move in that will pay a lot more. We're going to renovate the place, and we're seeing that also with our local businesses, right? That are the backbone of our community. So these are real things that I think the greater Boston area is having to tackle with displacement, and sort of the commodification, and the financialization of housing as an asset rather than housing as the human right. And so I think those issues are also intertwined. And so that's been a lot of my work, is how we can stop displacement, ensure that we have, housing stability in our communities, and that we make those investments so that we all have access to transit, and to mobility. So that's a bit of the kind of work there that is really ahead of us, and we're really trying to fight. And it's a real, like, I'll say, regional effort, right? And again, another example is how municipalities sort of get pit against each other. We're all fighting for our own thing, and there's a real need for us to come together and push for our shared, shared rights.
Thank you so
Great
much.
question. Let's see. Jeannie has a question in the chat. As a state representative, I'm sure you're faced with having to address needs in so many different communities. Do you have to make decisions on what you push to the forefront and be addressed first, and/or what is most important? If so, how do you make those decisions?
Yeah. I'll be very honest about this. The way I make those decisions is around a power analysis. I start there. And it's really about, power is about, right, interests and resources. Someone has power over you because they have resources that you are interested in. And understanding, right, where do we have our community power, and how do we fight for our interests using that power analysis. So that's really how I start, and how I figure out, how can we navigate that, and where are those opportunities to push for that? Because to your point, that's a really great question, because, we have to run, we have to fight for so many different issues, and how do you prioritize, right? And so I'm always looking for ways where we can challenge the current power structures through that power analysis that's available to us. So I'll just give like a quick an example of that, because I think everything I said is a little ethereal. 3 years ago, we had, just to take the school policing example, one of my constituents, her 6-year-old Black and brown son, so she's a Black and Latinx boy, 6 years old, first grade, the police was called on him for something that happened in the classroom. He now has a record, which we were able to expunge part of. But the community really came together on this. I mean, it was outrageous, right? He's 6 years old and he has a record. I mean, that is like school to prison pipeline, that stuff is going to come back and haunt him when he's an adult and he's 6 years old. And so that to me was also to the power analysis side, right? The community is coming around together and rallying around this issue. And that's where, despite all of the institutions and the system basically saying, you don't need to hold us accountable. To this day, we actually don't know how the police got involved. I mean, we have not been able to get the true story around what happened, despite all of these news articles, all of the, pressure from the community. We still don't know what happened. And so we said, as a community, fine, we're going to fight for foundational change. We want to see a real agreement with clarity, with the rights of students, the rights of parents and educators to understand how we're going to interact with these systems of power and policing, and to put those protections in place so that this shall never happen again. And so that is an example to me of like the power analysis is like, no, we actually have the people here on this one, right? We have won the narrative, and the system thinks that, winning the narrative is not enough. And I was like, no, they're wrong. I think we've got it. And even just like this week of like, we're mobilizing people right now to contact their school committee members. That's something like every parent I've called has been like, right on, tell me where to be, tell me what I need to look at. I'm moving. Let's do this. Right. And so I just shared that like one example of like where there was an opportunity and where we pushed on. It was really similar with the corporate tax break that I blocked. I worked on blocking with reps and with advocates. There's like these openings that I look for to see, okay, there is an option, an opportunity for us to be resourceful on the power piece. It's something I'm also currently working on with fighting for debt-free higher ed. I think that there's a real opportunity this year. I think that, but we need to build up that grassroots power. And so that's the piece I really try to figure out, how can we do that? Because I will say, I always do my research, always know thoroughly in and out the issues, but we don't win on, these are not knowledge problems. These are power problems at stake. It's not about knowing more. We know these problems, right? I don't need another study to tell me that the life expectancy between someone who lives in Roxbury and someone who lives in the Back Bay is over 30 years. I know that already. We know health equity is a problem and that racism kills. We don't need studies on that. I will read those studies because I need that as a way to fight for these issues, but these are not knowledge problems. These are real power problems. So I start with the power analysis and see if there's an opportunity there to help equip people and push for these changes, both on the inside and outside of the State House.
Gloria, what's your question?
Yeah, thanks, Everett. And thank you again, Rep. Uyterhoeven, for joining us this evening. I wanted to just follow up on something you mentioned earlier around building coalitions between urban, suburban, and rural communities. I don't know if I think you caught my intro, but I do work at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. So as a regional agency, this is something that we think about all the time. And I think hopefully this dovetails well into what you were just talking about in terms of power analysis and those really like systemic problems that are going to require that kind of collaboration, where a lot of the resources live in certain parts of the region rather than others. So I'm just curious if you could just talk a little bit more to how you approach that kind of coalition building.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's so critical. I mean, it's funny. A lot of coalition building for me is I just cold call people. I reach out to anyone. Anyone who will talk to me, I'll talk to them. I know that sounds a little bit like boiling the ocean, but I'll just give it I actually kind of related to like, particularly the ties between cities, right, in the state. We have a funding model, and I'll just say so revenue is my biggest passion. So I could talk about revenue all day, but I won't bore you all. But this as a revenue model, right? What we have currently is municipalities are largely funded by property taxes, which results in really inequitable systems because it's based on wealth, right? Like a lot of our wealth is tied up in our property. And so you see these giant disparities, right? Because we live in an unequal society. So, but that's like municipalities funding model is primarily from property taxes. And then you have the state. And we have all the tools in the toolbox, right? I mean, we can tax like anything, actually. I'm not anything, but a lot of things we can tax. Municipalities don't have those tools in their toolbox. And so they're reliant on things like Chapter 70 funding, which is for schools, right? Chapter 90 funding, which is for transportation. But it is really beholden to the State House to provide that funding. And I will say, like, just to take Somerville as an example, I mean, we are, oh my gosh. I mean, we have $1 billion backlog in sewer. It's not the most exciting funding thing, but I mean, sewer infrastructure, right? Our roads, our school buildings. And we are kind of held captive to the State House providing that funding because we have all those tools at the state level. So as an example of a coalition to build around that, and particularly around raising revenue, because a lot of folks in the State House feel that that is a really difficult vote to take, because folks don't, when they hear taxes, it's not great, but then we also need to pay for things like fixing, right, our common goods. I've been working on bringing together a lot of municipalities on this issue and really boiling down, right? When we talk about the big B numbers and the M numbers, like billions and millions, it doesn't mean a lot. But then when you talk about them in terms of like, this is money for your district and your city, right? And how it can be spent, that makes it something more accessible. And I have a bill on payment in lieu of taxes that is having nonprofit institutions pay their fair share in municipal taxation. And when I say nonprofits, that includes institutions like Harvard, Mass General Brigham, right? They are nonprofits with a $50 billion endowment, right? Or, so like that's like a nonprofit. And so that is an example, but bringing together, like, I've had so much amazing and like fascinating outreach with various municipalities, because again, it's something rural, suburban, and urban. Those are resources that these communities brings us all together around this. So that's something that, kind of building that power base, because like, that's also, these are the people who can also push my colleagues, right, to make these changes. So I really try to think about, like, when you build a coalition, right, like, how do we build power around, the things that we need, and what are our shared interests? And so that's one example of like coalition building, particularly that kind of spans that suburban, urban, and rural divide together. And I think that's funnily enough, I think like revenue and investment in our communities is something that it's a shared issue for all of us. And so I think that's just to give an example of like building a coalition around that. And so I think that I could apply that to many other challenges or problems to solve, but that's just one that came to mind particularly. And that's awesome you work for MAPC. Another one too that came up actually was around flooding with the Mystic River. So we've brought together the communities, I mean, not me, but like the Mystic River Coalition brought together communities in that whole region. And we've been working together on how do we bring all the reps, because if me alone as one rep says, we need, couple dozen $1 million, they're going to laugh me out the door. But if we get 30 reps right together saying each of us the same message, now we're talking. We actually got that funding last year in bonding. So really thrilled about that. It is also really scary that we are, if you live in the Mystic River Valley, we are dodging bullets from the dam overflowing, and that will mean coastal flooding for the entire region. And it's going to take them apparently 6 months to fix it if that happens, which is pretty scary. So, but the fact that we solved that problem, working on solving that problem, right, is through coalitions across all the municipalities and the reps that cover those districts. So that's just another quick example. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you, Erika. Thank you, everybody. If folks have other questions, as I mentioned, Diego dropped her contact info in the chat. Feel free to reach out. She is incredibly responsive. Out of all the senators and reps that I reach out to, she is one of the most responsive and quick to reply. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so good at this. So thank you for this. Thank you for, I think there's something in the chat said your passion and joy are infectious, and it really was. So thank you so much.